Rain poured heavily over the cracked sidewalks of Manhattan, splashing into shallow puddles and soaking the cardboard box nestled behind the alleyway dumpster. Inside that box was 12-year-old Jacob, skinny to the bone, his face dirty, his eyes far older than his years. Hunger was a permanent ache in his stomach, and survival was the only thing he had known for a long time. But even then, Jacob had a strange habit of looking out for others, people who, like him, had been forgotten by the world. That night the streets were unusually quiet. Most homeless folks had found shelter under bridges or subway tunnels to escape the freezing rain. Jacob was about to curl up and try to sleep when he heard a noise, a groan, faint and pained. He peeked from his shelter and saw a woman stumbling down the alley. Her expensive coat was drenched, her shoes weren't made for walking through dirty puddles, and her makeup was smeared with tears. But what Jacob noticed most was her swollen belly. She was pregnant, very pregnant. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice hoarse. She turned, shocked to see a boy in rags speaking to her, but then clutched her stomach and winced. Jacob didn't hesitate. He ran to her, grabbing her elbow to keep her from collapsing. "You okay? You need help?" I, I need a sit, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jacob helped her sit against the wall. "I don't have a phone or anything, but there's a 24-hour diner a block down. I know the owner. He lets me sit sometimes. Come on, you can warm up there." She looked at him, unsure whether to trust a dirty boy in the back of an alley. But the pain in her stomach didn't give her time to argue. She nodded. With her arm around his bony shoulders, they walked slowly to the diner. Jacob pushed open the door with his back and shouted, "Mr. Lee, she's pregnant! She needs help!" Mr. Lee, the grumpy old man who usually grunted when Jacob came in, was immediately alert. "Jesus, get her a seat. I'll call an ambulance." Jacob sat beside her while the woman gripped his hand tightly. Her breathing was shallow, fast, and filled with fear. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Vanessa Hayes," she muttered. "Thank you. You're going to be okay, Miss Vanessa. Just hang on." The paramedics came minutes later. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she grabbed Jacob's hand again. "Don't leave." He hesitated, unsure if they'd let a homeless boy ride along, but the medic saw her panic and nodded. "Come on, kid." Inside the ambulance, Vanessa kept her eyes on Jacob. Maybe it was the pain, maybe the fear of being alone, but something in his dirty face comforted her. She didn't know why, but in that moment, he felt like the only real thing in her chaotic world. Hours later, after a long night of labor, Vanessa gave birth to a baby girl. She was safe, and Jacob, despite being just a kid from the streets, was there the whole time, silent, watching, ready to help. The next morning, hospital staff tried to ask Jacob about his family, where he lived, who he belonged to, but he simply said, "Nowhere. I'm just glad she's okay." Vanessa asked about him too, but when a nurse went to find him, Jacob had disappeared. He didn't want charity or thanks. He just knew someone had needed help, and he had given it. Years passed, but Vanessa never forgot the boy with the gentle eyes and street-worn hands who had stayed beside her in the darkest moment of her life. And what she didn't know was, fate wasn't done with them yet. 15 years later, Vanessa Hayes stood on the 45th floor of the sleek Hayes Corporation building, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling window. Her daughter Layla, now a smart and spirited teenager, had just left for her first college tour. Vanessa had built an empire, yes, but not without its scars. Her company made headlines. Her name was praised in business magazines, but her soul had never forgotten the boy in the alley. That boy, whose name she never learned. The one who saved her when she was broken, pregnant, and alone. She had looked for him. Quietly over the years, she had offered donations to shelters, funded outreach programs, even commissioned private investigators with vague descriptions. But street kids vanish, and Jacob, though she didn't know that was his name, was just another lost soul the world had never kept track of. Until one Tuesday morning, her assistant knocked, announcing that a candidate for the community outreach director position had arrived early. "Send them in," Vanessa said, flipping through the applicant's resume. The name on the top read Jacob Wells. The door opened, and a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm, almost unshakable demeanor walked in. He wore a worn suit, clearly secondhand but neat. His posture was humble, but there was something quietly commanding about the way he carried himself. Vanessa's fingers froze on the paper. Her eyes slowly rose to meet his, and in that moment, she felt something in her chest tighten. "Jacob Wells?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you," he said with a polite nod. She stood, extending a hand. "Have we met before?" He hesitated for just a moment, something flickering in his eyes. "No, I don't believe so." But Vanessa knew. It was in the eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her 15 years ago in that alley. Older now, but not unfamiliar. She didn't push. Instead, they talked. Jacob shared his experience, how he had grown up in shelters, survived the system, eventually got a scholarship to a community college, and worked his way through nights studying and days volunteering. "I never forgot where I came from," he said, "and I want to give back. I think this position is my calling." Vanessa listened, but her mind was miles away. Later that night, after hours of hesitation, she pulled out an old photo from her drawer. It was a newspaper clipping from years ago. Vanessa Hayes, heiress, gives birth at local hospital after mystery rescue. The article never mentioned Jacob's name, but there was a blurry image of a boy standing in the background near the ambulance. She stared at it, then stared at Jacob's resume again. The next morning, she called him back for a second meeting. "I want to offer you the position," she said directly. "But first, I need to ask you something off the record." Jacob nodded but didn't speak. 15 years ago, she began, I was pregnant, alone, and collapsed in an alley behind a diner. A homeless boy helped me, stayed with me, got me help. I never got his name. Was that you?" Jacob paused, then exhaled. "I didn't think you'd remember." Vanessa blinked, a tear catching in the corner of her eye. "You changed my life," she whispered. "You saved my daughter." Jacob smiled faintly. "You saved yourself. I just helped." Vanessa reached across the desk and took his hand. "I never forgot you," she said, "and I never will." In the weeks that followed, Jacob settled into his new role at Hayes Corporation with surprising ease. His department focused on outreach, organizing food drives, funding shelters, and connecting with youth who'd fallen through society's cracks. It was personal to him. Every time he spoke to a lost teenager or visited a broken shelter, he remembered who he had been. Vanessa watched him closely, not out of suspicion, but fascination. Jacob was not just efficient, he was sincere. He treated every employee, no matter their rank, with respect. The janitor, the receptionist, the mail clerk, they all loved him. And Vanessa, though she tried not to show it, found herself quietly proud of the man he'd become. But not everyone shared her sentiment. At the board meetings, murmurs began to rise. Some directors were not happy. They didn't trust this man from nowhere, this ex-street rat who had somehow found his way into the company's inner circle. They said Vanessa was making emotional decisions, compromising business with charity. The loudest voice among them belonged to William Creighton, senior VP, old money investor, and a man who had never hidden his disdain for Vanessa's soft heart. "I understand you're grateful," William said during a particularly tense meeting, But hiring a homeless man to direct our foundation's budget isn't just reckless. It's a liability. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Jacob Wells is more qualified and more ethical than half the people in this room. Emotion clouds judgment, Vanessa. We need stability, not street sob stories, he snapped. Jacob, who had been seated at the far end, quietly rose to his feet. With all due respect, he said calmly, my past doesn't define my competence. In fact, it enhances it. I know what suffering looks like. I know how to stretch a dollar when lives depend on it. I don't come from wealth, but I come with purpose. If that's a threat to your comfort, Mr. Creighton, maybe it's time to ask why. The room went silent. Vanessa hid her smile. Jacob had said it without raising his voice, but his words struck hard. Still, the tension didn't disappear. If anything, it deepened. That night, Vanessa invited Jacob to her penthouse. Layla had returned from her trip and was eager to meet the man her mother had often mentioned, but never named. When Jacob walked in, Layla's eyes lit up with curiosity. "You're the one who helped my mom before I was born?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Yeah, you were just a bump back then." Layla laughed. "Well, thanks for that. I guess I owe you my existence." As the three sat around the dining table, a sense of warmth filled the room. Layla adored Jacob instantly. Vanessa felt at ease in a way she hadn't in years. After Layla went to bed, Vanessa poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Jacob on the balcony. "I owe you more than a job," she said softly. "I owe you everything." Jacob looked out over the city. "You don't owe me anything, but there's something I never told you." Vanessa turned curious. "I was going to leave New York that night. I'd planned to hop a bus. I was done. I didn't think there was anything left for me here. But then I saw you, pregnant, scared, and something inside me said, 'Help her first.' That choice changed my whole life." Vanessa's throat tightened. The city lights blurred slightly behind tears. They stood in silence for a while, 2 souls who had crossed paths in the unlikeliest of ways, now staring down at the city that had once tried to swallow them both. But neither of them knew yet. The past wasn't finished with them. There were secrets buried in that night, things Jacob didn't even know. And someone else remembered what happened 15 years ago. Someone who had been watching from the shadows all this time. The next morning, Jacob arrived early at the office as usual. But when he reached his desk, he noticed something strange. An unmarked envelope lying neatly in the center. No name, no stamp. Just a plain beige envelope with a single paper inside. He opened it. Typed in bold black letters were the words, "You think you know what happened that night. You don't. Stay in your place, Jacob Wells." No signature, no logo, nothing. Jacob felt a chill crawl up his spine. He immediately checked the office security cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary. But whoever left that note had done it deliberately, and it wasn't a prank. It was a warning. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his wallet. He wasn't going to tell Vanessa just yet. She had enough on her plate, especially with the board still on edge about his position. Meanwhile, across town, William Creighton was having a private meeting of his own. "I want everything on this Jacob Wells," he told his private investigator. "Where he came from, who raised him, what he's hiding. No one crawls out of a cardboard box into a skyscraper without help." The investigator nodded. "Already started digging. And you were right. Something doesn't add up." Creighton leaned forward, eyes cold. "Find me dirt. Anything. If she won't listen to reason, she'll listen to scandal." Back at Hayes Corp., Jacob continued working as if nothing had changed, but he had started noticing things. Eyes that lingered too long in the halls, files that went missing and reappeared mysteriously, whispers that stopped when he entered a room. Someone was trying to spook him, but he'd lived through worse. He wasn't going to back down now. A week later, Vanessa called Jacob into her office. "You okay?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "You've been tense lately." "I'm fine," he lied. She didn't buy it. Before she could press further, her assistant rushed in. "You need to see this." She handed Vanessa a folder, photocopies of documents that had been slipped anonymously under her office door. Inside were records, fake ones. They painted Jacob as a former gang member, an addict, even a petty thief. None of it was true, but it looked convincing. Vanessa stared at the papers, then looked at Jacob. Do you know what this is? Jacob's face was calm, but inside, he felt rage boiling. Yes, it's a lie. I believe you, she said without hesitation. But someone wants to ruin me, Jacob added, and they're not going to stop. Vanessa stood up, her expression sharpening. Then we don't wait. We dig. We find out who's behind this. Later that night, Jacob went back to the alley, the one from 15 years ago. He didn't know why. Maybe to clear his head. Maybe to remind himself who he really was. As he stepped into the narrow space between the buildings, memories surged. The rain, the pain in Vanessa's voice, the cold, the helplessness. And then he saw something strange scratched into the brick wall. She wasn't the only one that night. Jacob froze. He turned around slowly. A figure stood at the end of the alley. You've forgotten the full story, Jacob, the man said. His voice was rough, bitter. Who are you? Jacob asked. But the man just turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jacob with questions that clawed at his brain. What had he forgotten? What else happened that night? And who else had been watching? The message on the wall wouldn't leave Jacob's mind. She wasn't the only one that night. He lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events from that cold, wet night 15 years ago. He remembered Vanessa, how terrified she was, how he held her hand in the diner. But had there been someone else? Had he missed something? He had to know. The next morning, Jacob didn't go to the office. Instead, he went back to the diner where it all started, Mr. Lee's place. The old man was still behind the counter, older now, slower but sharp-eyed. Jacob, he said, stunned. Didn't expect to see you again. Jacob gave a tight smile. You remember me? Boy, you were practically raised in that alley, Mr. Lee said with a chuckle, always sharing whatever little you had. Even tried to trade your shoes once for soup. Jacob sat at the counter. Do you remember that night? The woman I helped? Pregnant? We came here before the ambulance showed up. Mr. Lee's smile faded. I remember. Was there anyone else that night? Someone else in the alley? Mr. Lee looked uncomfortable. He cleaned a glass slowly, deliberately. Why are you asking after all these years? I think someone's trying to hurt her. Or me. I don't know who. But someone's digging around. Mr. Lee sighed. There was someone else. A man. Showed up after you went inside to get help. I saw him looking through her purse. I chased him off. Thought it was a junkie. Didn't get a good look. Jacob's jaw tightened. Did he take anything? Not sure. Maybe a photo, some papers. Her bag was open when you came back. You didn't notice. Jacob cursed under his breath. What if he took something personal? Something he could use now? Mr. Lee shrugged. Anything's possible. That night, Jacob told Vanessa everything. The envelope, the writing on the wall, Mr. Lee's story. Vanessa paled. He went through my purse? Do you remember what was in it? Jacob asked. She nodded slowly. A sonogram, some hospital records, a letter from the baby's father. Jacob's head snapped up. You never told me about him. There wasn't much to say. We were together briefly. He left when I got pregnant. Said I was ruining his career. I hadn't even told my parents yet. That letter. It was him threatening to expose the baby to the media. Do you remember his name? Jacob asked. Vanessa clenched her jaw. Elliot Creighton. Jacob stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped. William Creighton's nephew? Vanessa nodded, the color draining from her face. Jacob didn't even need to think. That's who was in the alley. That's who's behind this. He's back. Vanessa's eyes filled with a mix of fury and dread. If he has that letter, he could claim Layla. Try to ruin everything. Her future, our reputation, mine. And mine, Jacob added, because helping you that night is what built my life. If they twist that into something else... Vanessa stood, her hands shaking. We need to find him, before he finds Layla. But Elliot was already moving. The next day, Layla received a message from a private account. Want to know who your real father is? Attached was a blurry photo of the letter and a grainy image of a man watching from the shadows, taken just outside her college tour. Layla's fingers trembled as she read it again. Her world was about to unravel. Layla stared at the message on her phone, frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. She had always believed her father was just someone who left, a man her mother never talked about for good reason. But this message claimed to hold the truth. And worse, someone had followed her. She didn't call her mom right away. Instead, she forwarded the message to Jacob, the only person who made her feel safe. Within 15 minutes, Jacob was at her dorm. "You okay?" he asked, the tension in his jaw barely restrained. She nodded slowly, showing him the phone. "Do you think it's real?" Jacob took one look at the photo of the letter and knew. It's real, and it's him, Elliot Creighton. "Who is he?" she asked, eyes wide. Jacob hesitated. "Your biological father." Layla's breath caught. "And he's just showing up now?" Jacob nodded. "Because you're of age. He doesn't want a relationship. He wants power, and he's using you to get to your mother. And me." Layla's expression hardened. "Then we fight back." Back at Hayes Corp., Vanessa was already in crisis mode. The company's legal team was brought in. A security team was hired for Layla, and an emergency board meeting was called. William Creighton played innocent. "I have no idea what my nephew is doing," he said smoothly, "but if he is attempting something, we'll cooperate." Vanessa wasn't buying it. She looked around the boardroom and spoke with authority. "Elliot Creighton abandoned his responsibility the day he walked away from me and his unborn child. He doesn't get to come back now to blackmail his way into our lives. If anyone supports his actions, be it in this room or outside it, I will burn this entire company to the ground before I let him near my daughter." A few board members looked uneasy. William's smile was thin. "Strong words for a woman who's built so much. Are you willing to risk it all for a former street rat in a teenage scandal?" Jacob didn't flinch. He stood beside Vanessa, silent but steady. Later that night, as Jacob walked out of the building alone, he felt eyes on him. "Wells," a voice called from the shadows of the parking garage. Jacob turned slowly. There stood Elliot Creighton, older but still polished, smug and soulless. "You've done well," Elliot said. "Better than expected, for a nobody." "What do you want?" Jacob asked, voice tight. "To take what's mine," Elliot replied. "My daughter, my piece of the company, my legacy." "You were never there for her." "You gave that up," Jacob growled. "I gave it up," Elliot agreed. "But now I want it back. And you're just an obstacle I forgot to crush 15 years ago." Jacob stepped forward. "You touch her or Vanessa, and I'll ruin you." Elliot's grin widened. "You don't even know the half of what I did back then." Jacob didn't ask. He just walked away. But inside, he was burning. The next morning, Vanessa found a new envelope on her desk. Inside was a flash drive. She plugged it in. A video began to play. Grainy security footage from a hospital hallway, 15 years ago. It showed a nurse handing over Vanessa's purse to a man in a coat. Elliot. The footage had a timestamp and everything. Vanessa's hands shook as she watched. Elliot had stolen the letter, the hospital records, everything. He'd planned this for years, and now he was coming for her company, her daughter, and the man who had stood by her side when no one else had. But Vanessa wasn't the same scared woman in an alley anymore. She looked at the screen and whispered, "You made one mistake, Elliot. You left me alive." Vanessa didn't sleep that night. Her mind ran like a war machine, calculating moves, planning retaliation, and preparing for the inevitable clash with Elliot Creighton. The video evidence gave her leverage, but leverage wasn't enough. Elliot was clever, manipulative, and rich enough to twist public perception. She needed to end this before it went public. She met Jacob early the next morning at her estate. Layla was still asleep, guarded by private security. Vanessa handed Jacob the flash drive. "This proves he stole my documents. It shows he was lurking even when I was in labor. This isn't just betrayal, it's premeditated." Jacob studied her carefully. "And what do you want to do?" "Destroy him," she said. "Not just for me, for Layla, for you, for that girl in the alley who almost died with no one to help her." Jacob nodded. "Then we don't just defend, we expose him." They got to work. Vanessa called in a tech expert from a private firm. someone who owed her favors. In less than 24 hours, they pulled up a string of financial records tracing Elliot's shady deals, offshore accounts, hush money transfers, and even links to a real estate scam that had evicted low-income families across the state. As they built the case, Jacob uncovered something else, a hidden report buried in medical records. It wasn't just that Elliot threatened Vanessa. He had tried to have her declared mentally unstable during her pregnancy, filing anonymous tips to a hospital board to strip her of her rights. The goal? Control the narrative and potentially gain custody if he ever needed to claim the child for political reasons. He never wanted a daughter, Vanessa said bitterly. He wanted a pawn. It was time to hit back. Vanessa called a press conference. The board protested, but she didn't care. William Creighton, sensing the walls closing in, tried to stop her at the elevator. "This will cost you everything," he warned. "No," Vanessa said coolly. "This is me taking it all back." At the press conference, she stood at the podium, cameras flashing. "I'm here not as a CEO, but as a mother," she began. 15 years ago, I was left abandoned and pregnant. I gave birth alone, but not entirely. A boy, homeless and barely alive himself, helped me. He showed me more humanity than the man who fathered my child ever did." She held up the flash drive. "This contains proof that Elliot Creighton, my daughter's biological father, stole personal medical records, attempted to manipulate hospital staff, and later conspired to re-enter our lives through blackmail." Gasps filled the room. "But this isn't just about me," she continued. "It's about every woman who has been silenced, every child born under a shadow of shame, and every man like Jacob Wells who rose from nothing to become a protector when no one else would." She turned to Jacob, who stood to the side. He nodded, and she smiled through the tears. Later that evening, the fallout began. Elliot Creighton's name trended, for all the wrong reasons. News outlets exposed his past. Board members scrambled to distance themselves. William Creighton went silent. And Vanessa? She filed a restraining order, but Elliot wasn't gone. That night, while Layla slept, a shadow moved past the estate's outer fence. A figure stood in the darkness, watching. He lit a cigarette, smirking. "This isn't over," Elliot whispered. "You took the light. I'll return with the storm." 2 weeks passed. Vanessa had weathered the storm, but the clouds hadn't fully cleared. Elliot Creighton had gone quiet. Too quiet. No lawsuits, no public statements, no interviews, just a deafening silence. And silence from a man like him was never a good sign. Layla was under 24/7 protection. She tried to continue her life, college tours, hanging out with friends, preparing her applications. But the tension never really left. Every knock on the door made her flinch. Every unknown number felt like a threat. Jacob had moved into the guest house on Vanessa's estate at her insistence. She said it was for safety, but truthfully, she just felt safer when he was close. He watched over everything, checking security, escorting Layla, tracking Elliot's digital footprints. Then, one rainy night, it happened. A blackout. The entire estate went dark at exactly 1:17 a.m. Emergency generators didn't kick in. Phones lost service. Security cameras went dead. Jacob was already awake when it happened. Instinct. He grabbed a flashlight and headed for the main house. Vanessa met him at the stairs, barefoot and wide-eyed. "Layla," she whispered. They rushed to her room, empty. The window was open, rain dripping from the sill. A single note was pinned to the bed. "Let's talk, like a family should." Jacob's blood went cold. "He took her?" Vanessa shook her head. "She wouldn't go willingly." "She didn't," he said, already running back down the stairs. Vanessa called the police, but Jacob didn't wait. He grabbed the keys to his car and drove into the storm, following the tracker he had secretly installed in Layla's phone 2 weeks earlier. The signal led him to an old warehouse on the edge of the city. Familiar. Too familiar. He parked and stepped out, wind howling, rain slicing sideways through the air. The warehouse doors creaked open. Inside, Layla was sitting in a chair, duct tape around her wrists, but otherwise unharmed. Elliot stood behind her, calm, polished as ever, as if he hadn't just kidnapped his own daughter. "Didn't think you'd come alone," Elliot said, grinning. Jacob stepped forward. "Let her go." Elliot's face twisted. "She's mine, my blood, my legacy." You. You're a stray dog that Vanessa fed once out of pity. Jacob didn't flinch. You had 15 years to be a father. You chose power instead. Elliot leaned closer. And look what I built. Look what she stole. I was going to be a senator. Jacob's fists clenched. Then you became a criminal instead. Funny, coming from a street rat. Jacob didn't argue. He lunged. The fight was fast, violent. Years of rage exploded in a blur of fists and fury. Elliot was bigger, but Jacob was stronger, hardened by life, not wealth. Every punch he landed was for Vanessa, for Layla, for the boy who lived in that alley with no name, no future. Elliot hit the ground, bleeding and gasping. Jacob rushed to Layla, cutting the tape from her wrists. You okay? He asked. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I knew you'd come. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Vanessa arrived moments later, rain-soaked and breathless. She ran to her daughter, wrapping her in her arms, trembling. It's over, Jacob said softly. No, Vanessa whispered. Now it begins. Elliot was arrested on the spot. Kidnapping, blackmail, and obstruction of justice stacked against him. The evidence Vanessa had collected sealed his fate. The media tore him apart. William Creighton resigned from the board in disgrace. In the weeks that followed, things began to heal. Layla wrote her college essay on the man who helped her mother in an alley and saved her life 15 years later. Vanessa publicly announced Jacob Wells as the new co-chair of Hayes Foundation, officially and forever, part of the family. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the estate, Vanessa joined Jacob on the balcony. Thank you, she said. He looked at her, smiling. For what? For staying, she replied. He chuckled. You think I ever had a choice? And for the first time in years, Vanessa laughed, free, unburdened, because sometimes a homeless boy becomes a hero, and sometimes the people we save end up saving us too.